It was a quiet evening in Austin, Texas, a night like any other. Sheriff Lisa Montgomery had just finished a long shift, patrolling the streets she had sworn to protect. As a respected law enforcement officer, she had seen it all: robberies, assaults, and murder. But nothing could prepare her for the horror she would discover in her own home. She walked into the house expecting the usual: a tired husband, a sleeping daughter, and a few moments of peace before another day of duty. But what she found instead would change everything. The moment she opened the bedroom door, she froze. Her husband, Mark Montgomery, was there. But he wasn't alone. And he wasn't supposed to be in that room. In a single instant, her world collapsed. The man she loved, the man she trusted, was doing the unthinkable. The rage took over. Lisa didn't reach for her gun, though she had used it 100 times before. This wasn't a moment for the law. This wasn't a moment for an arrest. This was something personal, something deeper than any case she had ever worked on. Instead, she grabbed the nearest weapon, a knife from the kitchen, and did what any mother would do when faced with pure evil. With one swift, brutal act, she took justice into her own hands. The call to 911 was chilling. "I need officers at my house. My husband, he won't be hurting anyone ever again." When officers arrived, Lisa was covered in blood. Her husband lay screaming, writhing on the floor in agony. His punishment had been served. But now the real question began: was Lisa a hero or a criminal? A story that shocked the nation. This case would divide the country. Some called it justice, a mother protecting her child, taking matters into her own hands when the system had failed. Others called it cold-blooded revenge, a sheriff who knew the law but chose to ignore it. Should she have let the courts handle it? Should she have controlled her rage, called for backup, and followed the legal process? Or was this one of those moments where the law simply wasn't enough? The trial that followed was one of the most controversial in Texas history. The courtroom was filled with anger, sorrow, and debate. The prosecution saw a sheriff who crossed the line. The defense saw a mother who had no choice. And in the center of it all was Emily Montgomery, a young girl whose innocence had been destroyed by the one person who was supposed to love her the most. Now we take you inside the shocking, brutal, and heartbreaking case of Sheriff Lisa Montgomery, the woman who took justice into her own hands. Lisa Montgomery was a woman built for the badge. Born and raised in Austin, Texas, she had law enforcement in her blood. Her father was a police officer, her uncle was a deputy, and from a young age she knew she wanted to serve and protect. Growing up in a strict but loving household, Lisa learned early on that justice wasn't just about following the law, it was about doing what was right. Her father, a respected officer, taught her that protecting people was a duty, not just a job. That lesson stuck with her, shaping her into the no-nonsense sheriff she would later become. Lisa was tough, disciplined, and known for her fearless approach to crime. Colleagues described her as someone who didn't just wear the badge, she embodied it. In a male-dominated profession, she earned the respect of her peers through hard work, intelligence, and sheer determination. But despite her reputation as a relentless law enforcer, Lisa had a soft side. She was deeply devoted to her family, her husband Mark Montgomery, and most importantly, their daughter, Emily. Lisa believed she had the perfect life. A strong marriage, a beautiful home, and a career she was proud of. She had seen families torn apart by violence and crime, but never once did she think her own family would become a headline. Until the night that changed everything. On the surface, Mark Montgomery was everything a woman like Lisa could want. He was charismatic, successful, and well-respected in their Texas community. As a businessman in real estate, he had built a solid reputation. He was known for his charm, his easygoing nature, and his devotion to his family. At least that's what everyone thought. Beneath the perfect exterior, Mark was hiding a monstrous secret. His marriage to Lisa started off strong. They were the golden couple, admired by many. Mark often played the role of the supportive husband, always standing by Lisa's side as she climbed the ranks in law enforcement. At social gatherings, he would brag about his wife's strength, joking that she was the real boss in the family. But behind closed doors there were warning signs, subtle ones, things that seemed small at first but hinted at something far darker. Lisa sometimes noticed Mark's temper flaring over minor things. She saw the way he could be manipulative, controlling situations to his advantage. He had a way of making himself look like the victim even when he was clearly in the wrong. And then there were the moments with their daughter, Emily. Lisa never wanted to believe the worst about her husband. He was Emily's father. He loved her. But there were little things. The way he insisted on spending time alone with Emily more than a normal father would, the overprotectiveness, the way he acted when Lisa walked into the room unexpectedly. It was nothing she could prove, nothing concrete. Until the night she walked in and saw it for herself. Emily Montgomery was just 14 years old when her world came crashing down. She had always been a bright, sweet girl, full of life and potential. Teachers at school described her as polite and intelligent, always eager to learn. She had dreams of becoming a veterinarian, a dream her mother encouraged. But as she grew older, something changed. Emily became more withdrawn, more quiet. She stopped hanging out with friends as much. Her once lively personality faded into something nervous and unsure. Lisa assumed it was just teenage mood swings. She thought Emily was just struggling with adolescence. But what Lisa didn't know was that her daughter was living in constant fear, a prisoner in her own home. Emily had no words for what was happening to her. Her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, had become the monster in her nightmares. He manipulated her into keeping his dark secret, warning her that if she ever told anyone, their family would be destroyed. Emily suffered in silence. Until the night her mother walked in and saw the truth. The moment their eyes met, Emily felt a rush of relief and terror all at once. And in that moment, Lisa Montgomery, sheriff, protector, mother. Became something else entirely. She became an avenger. Before that fateful night, the Montgomerys were seen as the perfect family. Lisa, the fearless sheriff. Mark, the respected businessman. Emily, the innocent daughter. But behind closed doors, the truth was something else entirely. Mark had been living a lie. He had built a facade that even Lisa, a trained investigator, had failed to see through. He had hidden his true nature behind smiles, success, and a well-crafted image. Lisa's world shattered in an instant. The husband she loved, the man she trusted, was nothing but a predator. And now she had a choice. Let the law take its course? Or take matters into her own hands? Her rage made the choice for her. She didn't care about courtrooms, judges, or trials. She didn't care about the badge on her uniform. In that moment she was not a sheriff. She was a mother. A mother who had just caught a monster hurting her child. And that monster? He was going to pay. This is where the story truly begins. What Lisa did next would shock the world. It would make headlines, ignite debates, and divide the public. Some would call her a hero. Others would call her a criminal. But one thing was certain. Mark Montgomery would never hurt anyone ever again. It was a warm summer evening in Austin, Texas. A night like any other. Sheriff Lisa Montgomery had just finished her shift, exhausted from a long day of patrolling and paperwork. The weight of her badge felt heavier than usual, but the thought of returning home to her husband, Mark, and their daughter, Emily, gave her some comfort. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed something odd. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Emily's bedroom light was on, but the rest of the house was dark. Mark's car was in the driveway, meaning he was home, yet the eerie silence made her uneasy. Lisa stepped inside, her instincts on high alert. Something felt wrong. She placed her gun on the kitchen counter and set down her keys. Usually, Emily would come running for a hug and Mark would greet her with a tired smile. But tonight there was nothing. Just silence. And then she heard it. A soft noise. It came from Emily's room. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as she walked down the hallway, her heart pounding with an uneasy rhythm. She reached the door and pushed it open. What she saw stopped her cold. There, in the dim glow of Emily's bedside lamp, was Mark. But he wasn't alone. Emily was in the room, frozen in fear and shame, her wide eyes filled with silent pleas for help. And Mark? Mark was caught in the most unforgivable act imaginable. For a split second, time stood still. Lisa's world shattered into a million pieces. The air left her lungs. Her vision blurred. Her fingers twitched toward her hip, reaching for a gun that wasn't there. It didn't matter. She didn't need it. The rage that surged through her was unlike anything she had ever felt before. This wasn't a criminal on the street. This wasn't some faceless monster. This was her husband. And he had been hurting their daughter. Mark's eyes widened in shock and fear. He stumbled back, his mouth moving, but no words came out. Lisa didn't care. In one swift motion, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy ceramic lamp from Emily's nightstand, and swung it with all her strength. The lamp smashed into the side of Mark's head, sending him crashing to the floor. Emily let out a sob, curling into a ball on the bed, too terrified to move. Lisa didn't stop. The rage inside her was blinding. Years of trust, love, and devotion meant nothing now. He was no longer her husband. He was a predator. A disgrace. She ran to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she grabbed a knife from the block. When she returned, Mark was crawling toward the door, his face bloodied from the blow. Lisa, wait, please. Let's talk. 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 Lisa saw red. Mark had already done the unthinkable. There was no coming back from this. He had betrayed their family in the worst way possible. And now he was about to learn what true pain felt like. With one swift motion, Lisa swung the knife downward, slicing through Mark's most vulnerable part. A piercing scream filled the house. Mark collapsed, clutching himself, his face twisting in unimaginable agony. Blood pooled beneath him. His hands trembled. His screams turned into whimpers. Lisa stood over him, her breathing heavy, her hands stained red. The man who had once vowed to love and protect her, the man she shared a home and a life with, was now writhing on the floor in pain, completely powerless. It was over. He would never hurt anyone again. With the knife still in her hand, Lisa turned to Emily, who was still curled up in a ball, sobbing. Lisa's heart ached for her daughter. She gently placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, whispering, "It's over, baby. He can't hurt you anymore." Emily didn't say a word. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Lisa knew what she had to do next. She walked back into the kitchen, picking up the landline phone with trembling fingers. Then she dialed. 911, what's your emergency? Lisa took a deep breath, her voice calm but deadly cold. I need officers at my house. What's the situation, ma'am? My husband. He won't be hurting anyone ever again. The dispatcher hesitated. The news of Lisa Montgomery's actions spread through the town of Austin, Texas, like wildfire. It was the kind of crime that sent shockwaves through the entire community, not just because of its brutality but because of who was involved. Lisa wasn't just any woman. She was a sheriff, a woman who had spent her life upholding the law. She had been a trusted officer, a respected figure, a protector. But now she was the accused. People had trouble believing what had happened. Mark Montgomery was known as a friendly, easygoing man. He had coached little league teams, attended neighborhood barbecues, and even sat in on local council meetings. No one suspected the dark secret he had been hiding. So when the news broke that his wife had mutilated him in a violent attack, people were in utter disbelief. But when they learned why, when the horrifying truth about what Mark had done to their daughter, Emily, came out, everything changed. Lisa Montgomery was no stranger to police protocol. She knew the moment she dialed 911 that she was about to go from sheriff to suspect in a matter of minutes. The officers who arrived at her home were not just her colleagues, they were her friends. Deputy Michael Carter had worked with Lisa for 7 years. He had patrolled the streets with her, responded to emergency calls with her, and even attended her family barbecues. Now he was the one placing her under arrest. Lisa, I need you to turn around. Lisa didn't argue. She simply nodded and did as she was told. The weight of the cold metal cuffs closing around her wrists was a feeling she had experienced countless times before, but never like this. You have the right to remain silent. Deputy Carter's voice faltered as he read Lisa her Miranda rights. His hands trembled as he secured the cuffs. This was a nightmare. For Lisa. For her colleagues. For everyone involved. She didn't resist. She didn't fight. She knew she had done what she had to do. And now she was ready to face whatever consequences came next. While Lisa was taken into custody, Emily was placed in protective care. The little girl was in a state of complete shock. The officers who arrived at the scene found her curled up in a blanket, rocking back and forth, unable to speak. She had just witnessed the two people she loved most in the world, her parents, become monsters before her eyes. First, her father, the man she had once trusted, had violated that trust in the most unspeakable way. Then her mother, the woman who had always protected her, had become a weapon of fury. Emily had always known her mother was strong. But she had never seen her like this. She had never seen that kind of rage. The crime scene was something that no child should ever have to witness. The blood on the floor. The screams of pain. The sight of her father writhing in agony. It was too much for a child to bear. The authorities quickly determined that Emily needed immediate psychological care. She was placed in the custody of a state-appointed therapist, and arrangements were made for her to stay with a close family relative. But no matter how many therapy sessions she went through, would she ever recover? Would she ever be able to erase that night from her mind? Or would it haunt her forever? Lisa's arrest divided the public. Some people called her a hero. Others called her a criminal. She did what any mother would have done, one woman shouted in an interview with a local news station. She took justice into her own hands. She's no better than a murderer, argued another. The debate raged across social media, talk shows, and newspapers. Was Lisa Montgomery a grieving mother who had snapped in a moment of blind rage? Or was she a dangerous vigilante who had no right to take the law into her own hands? There was no easy answer. Meanwhile, Mark Montgomery had barely survived the attack. He was rushed into emergency surgery, where doctors fought to stop the bleeding. They managed to save his life, but his injuries were permanent. Mark would never be the same man again. After being discharged from the hospital, he was immediately arrested and charged with aggravated sexual assault of a minor, child endangerment, possession of child exploitation material. The evidence against him was undeniable. His laptop and phone were confiscated, revealing a horrifying collection of incriminating files. Neighbors who had always seen him as a normal, friendly man now looked at him with disgust and hatred. He was labeled a monster, a pariah, and in the eyes of many, a dead man walking. The moment Lisa Montgomery was arrested, her case became a nationwide sensation. A sheriff, a mother, and now, an attempted murderer? The public was divided. Some saw her as a mother who did what the law failed to do. Others saw her as a rogue officer who let her emotions take over. Regardless of public opinion, the law had to take its course. Forensic teams swarmed the Montgomery home, collecting every shred of evidence. Blood samples were taken from the kitchen floor and bathroom. A knife, still coated with Mark Montgomery's blood, was placed in an evidence bag. Security footage from inside the house showed the moment Lisa snapped. Mark's injuries were documented in detail, a brutal yet precise attack. Meanwhile, detectives searched for the bigger picture. How long had Mark been abusing Emily? Were there other victims? Had Lisa planned this attack, or was it truly a crime of passion? Detective Sarah Hopkins, an experienced investigator in domestic crimes, led the charge. She was torn. She had spent years putting away men like Mark. And now she was being asked to put away a mother who stopped one. Mark was barely out of surgery when detectives arrived at his hospital bed. He was handcuffed to the rail, pale and weak. But when Detective Hopkins laid out the charges against him, his face turned red with fury. "I'm the victim here," he screamed. But his lies unraveled fast. His devices told the real story. Detectives found dozens of inappropriate photos and videos, chat logs detailing years of abuse, evidence that he had searched for ways to cover up his crimes. Mark had no way out. His lawyer urged him to take a plea deal. But Mark, still convinced he was the victim, refused. "I didn't do anything wrong," he insisted. The evidence said otherwise. While Mark awaited his trial, Lisa was preparing for her own legal battle. Her lawyer, David Ramirez, built his case around self-defense and temporary insanity. She wasn't just a mother, she was an officer of the law. She reacted in the heat of the moment, after discovering an unspeakable crime. But the prosecution saw it differently. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Langley argued that Lisa's actions were premeditated. She was a trained law enforcement officer. She knew the law. She knew how to de-escalate a situation. But instead, she chose violence. Lisa faced serious charges: attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, misuse of police authority. If convicted, she could face life in prison. But the jury had a decision to make. Was Lisa Montgomery a criminal? Or was she a mother who did what any mother would do? When Lisa's trial began, courtrooms were packed. Reporters, activists, and law enforcement officers watched as she took the stand. Tears welled in her eyes as she described the moment she caught Mark in the act. "I lost control. I saw my daughter's face, her fear, and I just acted." The jury deliberated for 2 days. And when they returned, the verdict sent shockwaves across the nation. Lisa Montgomery was found guilty, but not of attempted murder. Instead, she was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered. Others wept. Lisa lowered her head, knowing that justice was served, but at a heavy cost. Meanwhile, Mark Montgomery's trial was swift. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, his once friendly face was now that of a broken, despised man. He had spent years controlling his family. Now he would die behind bars. Lisa Montgomery's case sparked a nationwide debate. Some called for stronger protections for mothers who defend their children. Others argued that law enforcement officers should never take the law into their own hands. But one thing was clear. This was a case no one would ever forget. The trial had ended, but the consequences of that night would haunt the Montgomery family forever. Lisa Montgomery, once a respected Texas sheriff, a mother and a protector, was now a convicted felon. Her 10-year prison sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some believed she got off too lightly. Others felt she should never have been charged at all. But beyond the court of law, the true pain remained within her family. No one suffered more than Emily Montgomery, the daughter at the center of it all. At just 14 years old, she had endured unimaginable trauma. She had lost. Heavy check-marked her innocence. Heavy check-marked her mother to the prison system. Heavy check-marked her father to his own depravity. For months, Emily refused to speak. She withdrew from friends, school, and even her own relatives. She blamed herself for what happened. If I had just kept quiet, maybe Mom wouldn't have snapped. But therapy and time helped her slowly regain her strength. She moved in with her maternal aunt, Denise, who became her legal guardian. Through support groups for survivors of abuse, Emily began to understand. None of this was her fault. Her father had betrayed her trust. Her mother had fought for her, but at a devastating cost. And now Emily had to fight for herself. Meanwhile, Lisa Montgomery sat inside a maximum security prison, adjusting to her new reality. No badge. No authority. No control. Just an inmate in an orange jumpsuit. Though many prison guards and fellow inmates sympathized with her, Lisa kept to herself. She spent her days reading, writing letters to Emily, and attending therapy sessions. Despite her conviction, Lisa never expressed regret for attacking Mark. "The only thing I regret is not getting my daughter out of that house sooner." But time in prison changed her. She no longer saw herself as just a sheriff. She was a mother first. And when her 10-year sentence was up, she vowed to rebuild her relationship with Emily, if Emily still wanted her in her life. In a high-security Texas prison, Mark Montgomery spent his remaining days in isolation. There was no sympathy for men like him behind bars. His fellow inmates, many of them fathers themselves, despised him. He was targeted, harassed, and beaten. By the time he served 2 years, he had to be moved into protective custody. There he died alone, his cause of death undisclosed, but many suspected it was at the hands of another inmate. No one mourned him. No one visited his grave. And his name faded into obscurity, a fitting punishment for a man who had destroyed his own family. Years passed. Emily grew stronger. Lisa served her time. And though their story was one of violence and tragedy, it also became one of resilience. Lisa's case sparked debates on heavy checkmark victims of abuse who take justice into their own hands. Heavy checkmark the legal system's failure to protect children. Heavy checkmarked how far a mother will go to protect her child. One thing was certain. No one would ever forget the night Sheriff Lisa Montgomery took justice into her own hands. The story of Lisa Montgomery, a sheriff turned inmate, and her brutal act of revenge against her husband was one that gripped the entire country. It was more than just a crime story. It was a tragic tale of justice failing, a mother's desperation, and a child caught in the crossfire. Lisa's decision to take matters into her own hands was both understandable and shocking. Some saw her as a hero, a mother who did what the law failed to do. Others saw her as a criminal, a law enforcement officer who let her emotions take over. In the end, the law made its decision. Lisa paid the price for her violent actions, but Mark paid the ultimate price, losing his freedom, his power, and eventually his life. But beyond the headlines, the real question remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Lisa Montgomery's case sparked national debates about heavy checkmark the failure of the legal system to protect victims of abuse. Heavy checkmark the limits of self-defense and whether Lisa's actions were justified. Heavy checkmark the role of law enforcement officers when they themselves become victims. Many argued that if the system had acted sooner, Mark Montgomery would have been in prison long before Lisa ever pulled out that knife. Perhaps then she wouldn't have had to become a criminal to protect her own child. But justice doesn't always come when it's needed. And for Lisa, when the law failed, she made her own rules. Years later, Emily Montgomery found her voice again. She turned her pain into advocacy, working with organizations that help victims of childhood abuse. She became the symbol of survival, proving that tragedy does not define a person, it shapes them. Lisa, after serving her sentence, lived a quiet life, away from the spotlight. She never returned to law enforcement. But one thing remained the same: she would always be a mother first. And though the past could never be erased, she and Emily had a future to rebuild. His case serves as a harsh reminder of what happens when justice is delayed. When victims are ignored, when abusers are protected, and when desperation turns to violence, the consequences are unforgiving. The night Lisa Montgomery took justice into her own hands, she became both a criminal and a victim. And that's a truth the world will never forget. If you found this story shocking, thought-provoking, or eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more true crime stories that uncover the darkest family secrets. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We post new stories every week. Speech Balloon, what do you think? Do you believe justice was served in this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you.